Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, August 28th, 2018. Time for another show. Trying to scramble around, gather up information and material that we can share with you. There's plenty, of course, waiting in the wings. Just trying to see if there's anything fresh baked, straight out of the oven that we can share with you, and I'm sure that there is. Computer's a little slow in the uptake here today, but, well, that's life. And just getting used to it, and had to do a little bit of rigging behind the scenes just to try and get the show to start on time. I need to get, you know what I need? I need to get one of the, does this happen to everybody now? I have a monitor that is I don't know, doesn't come with the, didn't come with the computer, separately bought, and when you turn it on, initially you get that please wait message, and I don't know whether this is just like cheesy monitor that I bought at Best Buy that does this, or does every television/monitor do this now? And it's getting slower and slower in waking up, and as I get ready for the show and I try to bring up the soundboard so that I can fade out the music and bring in the music right on time, the thing is too sleepy, too drowsy in waking up, and I'm sitting there looking at a black screen waiting for it told me to please wait, so I'm waiting, but come on now, like 2 minutes for this thing to wake up. And I'm in the background here with the microphone off. I should just turn the mic on, screaming in the background, come on, wake up. I got to start the show. I got to hit all I got to do is hit a button. Can't you just wake up and let me hit the button? I don't know. Although that's probably what goes on in the White House every morning anyway. So we don't need to, I don't know. I need to speculate on that. Nothing outrageous this morning. People are just outraged at what's been happening over the last couple of days, but a couple of good recommendations and comments to pass on to you. More stories to read, of course. More reporting, more background reporting from over the last couple of days, I guess, giving confirmation of what we could all see from the photographs and the body language out of Trump when he was asked yesterday, do you have anything to say about John McCain, and just sitting there in that cross-armed pose he does, which is fabulous for Darth to Photoshop into a straitjacket. He's just screaming for us to put one on him. Either to Photoshop one on or, maybe not Photoshop one on, but actually place one on him. An incredible display yesterday, and eventually, I guess by mid-afternoon, he had given in to, I don't know who persuaded him to let it go. I would love to know I don't know. I think I would like to know the inside scoop on how that whole thing happened, and to have heard the conversation wherein I would assume, well, in any other White House, I would have assumed that somebody would have brought him in the morning, pro forma, a paper for him to sign, a proclamation about the passing of John McCain and an order for lowering the flags to half staff. And I guess that order, I don't know whether they have to wait for it and the rest of the government, or they just assume it's coming or whatever. But of course, yesterday Greg was telling us there were photos circulating of the White House with its flag still at full staff, and the flags at the Washington Monument in the background flying at half staff. Anyway, he finally gave in, and they finally lowered the White House flag. But I would like to have heard the conversation where well, here you go, sir, sign this. What's this? It's a proclamation about death of John McCain, ordering the flags to half staff, etc. Routine presidential stuff. I'm not signing this. I'm not going to do this one. Well, why not? Why not? I'm just not going to do it. You can't make me do this. This is crazy. I don't want to, screw that guy. He's not a hero. I don't know whether he bothers to go into the details of his reasoning, if there is any. But I kind of would like to see the faces of people looking at one another as he says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sign that. No, screw that guy. And as they look about in wonderment, I think there probably was some reporting about it. And I saw something quickly out of the corner of my eye, opening up the front page of Daily Kos, as a matter of fact, that hinted that perhaps that reporting was out there. I'll see if we can grab it and see if that tells us what we are looking for here. Plenty of other things to cover, though. And what I'm looking at here is the diary by Annie Lee, I think is how we decided we would pronounce that all one-word name. Longtime Daily Kos denizen, writing, Haberman goes all cryptic about the White House's den of sociopaths. And I think this might be a little bit about that. I'll have to sort of skim it and see if that's what's served up there. In the meantime, plenty of things to catch up on. And maybe we'll read some of those longer pieces that have been waiting for a while. And I don't know. We'll try and catch up with things here. Let's see. Oh, Matt Rigdon already with a, is this for real? Use an app for Mac called Amphetamine. Are you sure? But to keep my machine from sleeping at certain times. Has more options and system preferences. Oh, I didn't even think like, oh, you mean there's an actual button I can use to keep it from doing this? I figured it out on the telephone. The phone will no longer ring from 9 to 11. But the computer, I have yet to figure out. Let's see. Also supports scheduling the machine to wake at certain times. And this is a good idea. I have mine shut down usually overnight. It just, it needs that rest. Anyway, let's go. Let's take the show on. We'll take the bull by the horns, as it were. Oh, yes, look at this. Daily Kos Radio is live now, in case you were wondering about whether that was in fact the case, despite my not having read Bill's morning tweet. Let's see what he says the show's going to be about. That's as good as anything. Kagro X, that's me. Hi, everybody. Updates the current up-down status of the White House flag. We did do that. I think it's up now. As well as Trump's 23rd consecutive hour waiting for someone to say something on the other end of his speakerphone. Oh, yes. Not a major story necessarily, but did you see that one yesterday? He, I guess, was trying to have a phone call for some reason with the president, still president of Mexico. The incoming president has not yet been inaugurated, but still President Enrique. Enrique, is that you? Enrique, I should just stage a call right now. Hello, Enrique. Enrique, what is it? Peña Nieto, is that right? Have I got that correct, Enrique? Enrique Iglesias, is that you? That's the only Enrique he ever knew, I think. But there's this, I don't know, there's video circulating of him trying to have a call with him, and it was a part of another prematurely held press conference / discussion of, open-ended nonsense discussion with the press to announce that nothing had happened, essentially. Just as with the North Korea non-agreement of any kind whatsoever, he now claims we've done a bilateral. Let's do a bilateral. We're going to do a bilateral. He wants to replace NAFTA, as you know, because he once heard somebody complain on Telly about NAFTA. So he wants to get rid of NAFTA and replace it with NAFTA, but something that has the Trump name in it, preferably. And so he's going to do a bilateral trade agreement with Mexico. And I think the story largely is that he got some agreement in principle, some sort of informal agreement with Mexican negotiators that they're going to, work something out. So he, of course, announced that the whole thing is finished and it's the largest trade deal ever negotiated in history and the most successful ever, and everybody's going to want to be in it, which is because it's a bilateral, which, of course, precludes other people from, all right, whatever. Anyway, experts, so-called experts all over the place pointing out, you can't just say NAFTA is over. There's a whole procedure you got to follow, and legally this and legally that. You got to follow that unless you just don't follow it, which is always an option for Donald Trump, although frequently he proclaims things to be so and then finds out that the courts say, nah, that's not the way it works. That's not the way any of this stuff works. And you're an idiot, and we reinstate this other thing. And then he gets mad and says, what's wrong with this country is all the bureaucracy. So, I don't know. We'll wait and see. We'll update how that's going. A lot of other fun stories to share. One suggestion here from Parleo who hasn't chimed in a while, so we'll have that one open up. And let's see. It is a nice short piece, he says, on why Kavanaugh is not a good pick from a libertarian source. Now, we know that there's no such thing as a libertarian, of course, but, we like to let people self-identify in these ways, and we'll allow it in this case. Lots of reasons why Kavanaugh would not be a good choice. Let's hear what a libertarian thinks. On the recommendation of our friend Parlio here. How to Judge a Judge by Scott Sumner. Who is Scott Sumner? I don't know, but he's the author of this piece. That's all I can tell you about it. What are we looking at here? A blog entry, is that right? On EconLib, the Library of Economics and Liberty. Interesting. Okay. We'll take a quick look here. Scott, what do you have to tell us? Some people favor conservative judges, while others prefer liberal judges. Hey, this may take a while. It's a short piece, I'm assured. I like fair and unbiased judges. It's like I'm talking to Donald Trump. You know what? I like judges who weren't captured, okay? Very rarely are judges captured, sir. Well, don't correct me. Consider Judge Kavanaugh, who once was in a position to investigate President Clinton. And he is quoting here from a Yahoo News piece. I guess you could have gotten this from anywhere. You all know who President Clinton was, yes? And that he was investigated? All right, well, Brett Kavanaugh had something to do with that. Mr. Kavanaugh, who at the time was an associate counsel for Ken Starr, the man leading the probe, wrote he was strongly opposed to giving the president any break in questioning unless he resigns or confesses perjury. This was a big story, discussed a couple of, not quite, maybe a week or two ago, when they discovered this memo. Not a huge discovery. I mean, I think everybody knew exactly where he stood with respect to the Clinton probe then, and then that no one will now be surprised that he now thinks that this president should be given all kinds of breaks because something. Entitled Slack for the President? ? The memo, dated 15 August 1998, in it he wrote, the president has disgraced his office, oh my goodness, the legal system and the American people by having sex with a 22-year-old intern and turning her life into a shambles, callous and disgusting behavior that has somehow gotten lost in the shuffle. I don't know what shuffle he was looking at. Do you know anybody who lost the Monica Lewinsky episode in any shuffle whatsoever? He added, he should be forced to account for all of that and to defend his actions. It may not be our job to impose sanctions on him, but it is our job to make his pattern of revolting behavior clear, piece by painful piece. That is a remarkable statement from a deputy to the then, I guess, independent counsel. He went on to recommend 10 questions he wanted to pose to Mr. Clinton, suggesting the then president would be required to answer them, quote, to make his pattern of revolting behavior clear, unquote. After seeing how investigations impacted the Bush administration, sorry, I was thinking British because they used the wacky British spelling of behavior, and it raised a question in my mind. I guess this is the answer. The editorial policy on reproducing direct quotes from public figures, I guess I'd be more, well, and this is a written piece, right? So he's quoting Kavanaugh's writing, and Kavanaugh almost certainly spelled behavior without the U in it. And this is a direct quote from it, and I'm wondering whether, I guess the editorial policy, at least this editorial policy, or maybe it's just a typo, and the guy was reproducing somebody somewhere along this chain of custody was reproducing the quote and just accidentally put the U in there, or maybe autocorrect did. But what's the policy? If you're reproducing a quote from an American person, written quote, using the spelling of behavior without the U, and you're putting it in a British newspaper, do you quote it as written and say he's a dumb American and he doesn't know how we spell it? Or do you correct it so that people don't go, hey, there's a typo in your newspaper, and you have to explain it wasn't me, it's an American writing it? I don't know. I'm just curious about that. I sometimes spend a lot of time wondering about things that don't matter in the least, but they make things so much more interesting. Anyway, after seeing how investigations impacted the Bush, not British, administration, he changed his mind. There we are. And he didn't even wait for Trump to come into office to change his mind. It was the next Republican president being investigated was all it took for Brett Kavanaugh to decide that, let's say, a ball was a strike or a strike was a ball, as the case may be. This time, an excerpt from a CNN article from when? Does it tell me the date here without having to click all the way through? No. Well, I mean, it does tell me the date of the article. It's a current article and reporting on what happened back in the Bush administration in 2009. There we are. In a Minnesota Law Review article, Kavanaugh detailed his concerns about indicting a sitting president, saying his views had changed over the issue since the 1980s and 1990s. My views have changed since the 1980s. That's a great soft pedal there too. Judge Kavanaugh. Let's see. This is 2009. So in 2009, he's a member of I think he's already on the appeals court. So if you ask him about it, Judge Kavanaugh, your Minnesota Law Review article appears to me to evidence a very different view of presidential, of questioning or indicting a sitting president than you used to advocate for when you were investigating President Clinton. Can you help explain that? Yes. Well, my views have evolved and changed on the issue of indicting a sitting president since the 1980s. That's an interesting dodge because, of course, the Clinton investigation happened in the 1990s, and they add and 1990s, but I'd be curious whether he offered that up as a dodge. I notice your views have changed. Can you tell us about why? And without mentioning, one, I was first investigating President Clinton, who is a Democrat, and now people are investigating George Bush, who is a Republican. That's what changed here, not my views. But obviously you have me here. I can't sit here like Donald Trump would and say my views haven't changed. And again, that's a big difference. Donald Trump would just say, no, they haven't. My views haven't changed. Well, right here, you, for instance, say that this color, and you provide a sample for us, is black. And you now point to the same sample and tell us it is white. Have you changed your mind? No. Well, is it black or is it white? It's white. But most people would look at this and say objectively this is black. Well, not me, okay? Some of these things are based on my feelings, okay? Right, that's the way I do things. I don't know. But of course, in this case, what changed his mind was judging a president of a different party and not wanting to say that. He says, my views have changed since the 1980s. Well, in the 1980s, you were like 15 years old. So I would assume your views changed since then. We're really talking about since the last time you expressed your views, which was in the 1990s, and it was explicitly about President Clinton. Why won't you simply say that your views have changed since the Clinton administration? And, he might be willing to say that, but the reason he's avoiding it is so that he can just say, views evolve over time. What can I say? Without invoking the fact that they've changed because of who the president is. How old is Brett Kavanaugh anyway? I'm just kind of curious. We'll look that up. Can I get to the Wikipedia? All right, he's 53 years old. He was born in 1965, so that at 1985, he's 20 years old. My views have evolved since I was 20. Yeah, because you weren't a lawyer. And, what am I supposed to make of that? I don't know. I find that an interesting dodge. Once again, just another small thing that we can hang up the whole show really on. Okay, so my views have changed over the issue since the 1980s. Oh, and also the 1990s. Having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is. Oh, and by the way, I guess we should point out, he's not a youngster at this point, but I suppose even if we are talking about the views he had while working on the Clinton investigation, he's 30 at that point. So we're talking about, I guess if he went directly to law school, he's perhaps 6, maybe 7 years out of law school. And, there are some brilliant theorists out there who become constitutional scholars right off the bat, I suppose. But it's interesting that he's opining so clearly on, we've been over this ground before, whether or not you can indict a sitting president. We've been through Watergate. And you were, of course, in nursery school during Watergate. But the point here really is you have some opinions. Why don't you tell us, why don't you tell the independent counsel, write him a memo about why you should overturn that precedent based on just pure principle, of course, not your ideological leanings. This 30-year-old lawyer is going to change directions for us. Okay. It's been done. Some of the founders were younger than that, so it's okay. Everyone loves that example. Anyway, so he's changed his views since the 80s and 90s, having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is. I believe it vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible, he wrote. The country wants the president to be one of us, who bears the same responsibilities of citizenship that all share. But I believe that the president should be excused from some of the burdens of ordinary citizenship while serving in office. And I guess one of those burdens is telling the truth about things and being held to account for it. But you see, it's all different now because I have seen firsthand how busy the president is. And he had to be, cabinet secretary or something like that? White House staff secretary during the George W. Bush administration. So he got to see finally up front, up close, how busy a president was. This was something he could have evidently not imagine as a 30-year-old constitutional scholar, that the president was a busy guy. He was ready to, I think we should be able to criminally indict a sitting president. Nobody ever said to him, well, the working theory is that you can't. And that it's because the president is an extraordinarily busy person and he can't be distracted from his very important day-to-day oversight of so many issues, the national security, etc. And at some point, Kavanaugh, at all of 30 years old, says, I understand your argument. I simply don't accept it. Having seen firsthand the way government works in the 7 years or so since I graduated from law school and have been working in these rarefied positions, I've learned all there is to learn about the Constitution, and I know people say the president is busy, but I don't really think so. What it took to show him that the president, as this doctrine stated, was, as the existing doctrine at the time, was a very busy person was, I have to see it with my own two eyes. Like most Republicans, he has no grasp of anything he hasn't seen personally, and he can't empathize, and telling him that the president is a very busy person doesn't work unless that president is Republican. We have no direct proof of that because at 30 years old, he only knew about Democratic presidents, and those guys aren't busy. I don't know. Anyway, our author here says, this reminds me of some poll results I saw a few months back. Does it? The poll is, white evangelicals grow more accepting of politicians' personal indiscretions. Our author is beginning to clue in on the Gimmitarian manifesto here. Here's the percent who say an elected official who commits an immoral act in their personal life can still behave ethically and fulfill their duties in public and professional life. Well, in 2011 and then versus 2016 are our two data sets here. Among all Americans in 2011, 44% said that a elected official who commits an immoral act in their personal life can still behave ethically and fulfill their duties in public and professional life. 44% of all Americans said yes. In 2016, 61% of all Americans said yes. And the same question put to white evangelical Protestants in 2011, that is to say, before Donald Trump, only 30%, because they were only going with the example basically of Bill Clinton, though by 2011 you had the example of George W. Bush and Barack Obama to go on, but of course Barack Obama hadn't committed any immoral acts that came to light in the traditional sense of the term. But, neither did, when we're talking about immoral acts and you're questioning, particularly if you're questioning evangelicals, you're asking about sex. Things like bombing innocent populations don't count as immoral acts unfortunately, with a lot of people. And you could have asked that question about either of the presidents. But, when they say immoral act, wink, wink, like Bill Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky. All right. Well, in 2011, 30% of white evangelical Protestants thought it was still possible to be ethical in and fulfill your duties in public and professional life if you had committed some immoral act in your personal life. Whereas 72% of all Americans thought, I'm sorry, I've mixed up the numbers here. By 2016, when Donald Trump had committed his immoral acts in his personal life, 72% of white evangelical Protestants said, that's okay. You can still fulfill your obligations of public office. Let's see. White mainline Protestants, the numbers broke down at 38% in 2011 and 60% in 2016. Basically, it increases with almost all groups. We become, I guess, inured to or immune and jaded about these immoral acts, these so-called immoral acts, by 2016. Now we just can't take it anymore, I suppose. Let's see. White mainline Protestants, 38% said they can still do their job in 2011, 60% in 2016. Catholics, 42%, then rising to 58%. The only group in which it declines from 63% to 60% are the unaffiliated. The unaffiliated, apparently, still fairly certain, just like they were way back when, that immoral acts don't really seem to have that much influence on public life. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with this short piece that we've turned into a long piece because my commenting is unrestrained. Okay, so the basic premise here is that lots of people either had their views evolve, as Brett Kavanaugh says he did, or perhaps they were hypocritical then and now, as you might think Brett Kavanaugh is. Notice our author says that the title of the graph does not accurately characterize the question. The title implies a normative judgment, accepting, whereas the poll is about a purely positive question. Can those committing moral acts do a good job on public policy questions? I could imagine someone thinking a sleazy politician could do a good job and yet still not be accepting of their behavior. Also, notice a particularly large shift in the views of white evangelical Protestants. I wish black evangelical views had been reported, he says parenthetically. In 2011, many poll respondents might have visualized Bill Clinton when answering the question. In 2016, Donald Trump may have been on people's minds. I don't see how you could not think that. Just to be clear, I have no problem with anyone changing their mind, whether it be Judge Kavanaugh or evangelical voters. However, I would hope that views on issues of principle do not reflect political calculation. Thus, one's view on the constitutionality of the so-called Muslim travel ban and or Obamacare should not in any way depend on whether the judge views these as sensible public policies. Special prosecutors seem like a good idea to me, a way of preventing presidents from becoming too authoritarian or corrupt. Having said that, I'm in no position to judge whether this particular institutional setup is constitutional, so I am not going to offer an opinion on that question. However, Considerations such as having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is, I believe it's vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible. Or, the president has disgraced his office, the legal system, and the American people by having sex with a 22-year-old intern and turning her life into a shambles, callous and disgusting behavior that has somehow gotten lost in the shuffle. Well, considerations such as these two do not have any bearing on whether special prosecutors have a constitutional right to investigate U.S. presidents. Will Judge Kavanaugh be able to separate his personal views from his decisions on the constitutionality of various laws? Perhaps. No, the answer is no. But this case doesn't exactly inspire confidence. After all, it's not just that his views changed when the U.S. switched from a Democratic to a Republican president. Even the tone of his remarks feels quite different. Let's hope he will be equally willing to provide slack for the president of either party if he is confirmed to a position on the Supreme Court. Well, let us hope it, but I should say you wouldn't want to be holding your breath, let's say, in anticipation of that actually demonstrating itself. I think you'll suffocate before that happens. Okay, let's see. Where are we here? We'll have to catch up on a couple of other new items and lots of tweeted comments today. Let's see if we can catch up on them. I don't know how did we get to this one, Matt? Grizzly Adams was a libertarian? Grizzly? Or is he was that the founder that we're talking about? John Grizzly Adams, his well-known nickname. Michael Musson says the bilateral didn't need to be stopped by the courts. The speakerphone had Trump totally flummoxed. Yeah, it did. Did we finish talking about that? I don't know. If you haven't seen that video, it's a treat. He's trying to get the president of Mexico on the phone, I guess, as part of this announcement about the non-agreement. And it's just bizarre watching Trump try to work a speakerphone and sitting there in front of reporters and everything, right in the middle of the Oval Office on his stupid desk with nothing on it but his telephone. It's not the tele. He probably has the remote control in a drawer somewhere. But sitting there, hello, Enrique, are you there? A most amazing thing. And by the way, somebody else reported this morning, not entirely clear that the president of Mexico was warned that he was going to be on speakerphone on camera in the middle of the Oval Office and the press pool either. Not that I expected him to say anything embarrassing, but it might have been nice to let him know. I don't know. Anyway, let's see. Kate Sherrill also keeping us up to date on polling, showing the Texas Senate race closer than ever, with O'Rourke within 1 point of Cruz there, and that's always good news. Athena 5000 making a suggestion for us, which shuffle Monica Lewinsky may have been lost in. Our guess, the Harlem Shuffle. I think that still came well after that, but who knows. It may be just that the internet craze of it's Harlem Shake, those videos, right? Harlem Shuffle is the Rolling Stones, the latter-day Rolling Stones song, I think. But I like the effort. It's a good one, and it's a callback on two things I'd rather forget. Matt Rigdon also commenting, personally, I don't think Kavanaugh gets a vote before November 8th. That's a possibility. I think Republicans want him as a campaign issue for evangelicals, especially as more and more comes out about Trump and his moral failings. That may very well be. And two other comments here. One, there are still churches in America that teach mixed race marriages are immoral. Just saying, in terms of what's an immoral act. That's true. Good point. And, well, yeah, Grizzly Adams was a mountain man type 1970s show, I remember. But why did we get to him? Well, we were talking about libertarians, and was that just random? Did we say something? I certainly didn't talk about Grizzly Adams. I like to think of him as a founding father, so I think that's much more interesting. Having him show up in the middle of, let's say, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He looks like he belongs in that painting. Not at all, of course, but it would be fun to have added him to it. Let's see, and another suggestion for story here from Kate Sherrill. I don't know if we'll get to this one here. Lachlan Marquet reporting the former sole Latino employee of immigration restrictionist group FAIR F-A-I-R, says a coworker called him, a racial slur, and you probably have a pretty good guess which one that is when it comes to Latinos. And another offered to smear mud on her face to play the part of an illegal immigrant in a documentary video that reported in Daily Beast, and that's disgusting. Okay, Matt Rigdon's explanation for the invocation of Grizzly Adams. You said there were no real libertarians. I do, and Grizzly Adams is, of course, it's not real. But I didn't need to tell you that. And also, he's still a gimmitarian. And I'm not certain that he would even agree that he was a libertarian. I think, though, as long as we're talking about fake people, the greatest libertarian of all time, at least literary libertarian that I'm aware of, Vito Corleone. No coincidence that he also happens to have been branded a criminal, because he was one, by our society, but that's a guy who really forget Galt's Gulch, his little enclave and fortress that he built for himself on his cul-de-sac is probably closer to Galt's Gulch than anything else you're likely to see in reality or in literature anywhere. All right, let's see what's going on here. More mentions of people in my timeline going to Iceland. Congratulations to you. But now, on to the news. I will hang on to this piece here from the Daily Beast to share with you later on, but perhaps we'll read a couple of the other pieces, as I threatened to do earlier, perhaps some of the longer form pieces. What do we got here that needs discussion? Let's try this one here from the New York Times just before, coming out of the weekend. This would be yesterday's piece. A little bit of information and an interesting framing, I thought, for Bruce Orr, the FBI dude guy. I don't know what he does over there at the FBI. What's his, he's a longtime Justice Department official. Bruce Orr is how he's identified in the caption of the photo. But, the guy that Donald Trump is constantly attacking along with everybody else at the Department of Justice. But the name that makes everybody say, who is he talking about? He's getting petty about somebody and no one knows who it is. And that's, for some reason, extraordinarily weird. The rest of the stuff apparently not weird, but this is. Anyway, Adam Goldman and Katie Benner put this piece together here. And an interesting framing in the headline. Bruce Orr fought Russian organized crime. Remember, he's a Department of Justice official. He fought Russian organized crime. Now he's a target of Trump. Emoji we would add to that headline. What do you make of that? When a lawyer for one of Russia's most powerful reputed crime bosses, and there's the right terminology there, arrived at FBI headquarters one day around 2006. He wanted to cut a deal. The Russian, and this is really one of the actual, the one that even Russians will say are crime bosses, Semyon Mogilovich. Well, this Russian had been indicted 3 years earlier by the department on charges of defrauding a company outside Philadelphia of $150 million and could not travel for fear of arrest. Okay. As the lawyer made his pitch, a supervising FBI agent and a senior career Justice Department official, Bruce G. Orr, both listened intently, according to a former bureau official who described the meeting. The case was significant for American law enforcement. It had made headlines and laid the groundwork for Justice Department efforts to combat Russian organized crime overseas. Finally, the FBI agent spoke. No deal, he said. Mr. Mogilovich must surrender. Mr. Orr said little, but his unwillingness to negotiate was signal enough. The Justice Department would not compromise with the Russian mafia. Occasionally, you run across people from the Justice Department who have an air of superiority toward agents. And Bruce had none of that, said Chris Swecker, a former senior FBI official who worked with Mr. Orr. He was just the opposite. He was well liked at the FBI and fought for their cases. So he's not an FBI figure. He's a DOJ figure. Of course, the FBI comes under the Department of Justice, but you get the picture. In nearly 3 decades at the Justice Department, Mr. Orr has made a career of supporting and facilitating important cases that targeted Russian organized crime. Now he is a target of President Trump, who has put his security clearance, Orr's, under review and attacked him publicly and allies. What? He's the target of President Trump and allies, I guess is how that construction is supposed to read. But along the way, we had this phrase set off that he attacks him, his security clearance, etc. They have cast Mr. Orr and his wife, who worked as a contractor at the same research firm that produced a damaging dossier of information about Mr. Trump, as villains, part of a pro-Clinton cabal out to destroy the president, which is not a bad idea. But Mr. Orr, 56, is far from corrupt, friends and former colleagues said. An experienced law enforcement official, he has a deep understanding of the underworld of Russian organized crime, they said, including raising concerns about at least one oligarch, mob boss, whose name has resurfaced amid the scrutiny of contacts between Trump associates and Russia. As part of his work, Mr. Orr met a British spy who specialized in Russia, Christopher Steele. And the two men developed a bond based on their shared expertise. Mr. Steele went on to investigate ties between Mr. Trump and Russia for the same research firm, Fusion GPS, where Mrs. Orr was a contractor. Those connections have upended Mr. Orr's once relatively anonymous life, dragging him into the maelstrom of the Russia investigation. Justice Department officials transferred Mr. Orr, an associate deputy attorney general, to a less powerful post last year after learning about his contacts with Mr. Steele and the scope of his wife's work. If he loses his security clearance, he would probably be forced to leave federal law enforcement after nearly 3 decades. For him to be in the Justice Department and doing what he did, that is a disgrace. That is, of course, according to Donald Trump, who he said this of Mr. Orr this month to reporters. Fighting organized crime for the Department of Justice. That's a disgrace. Well, it is a disgrace if you're fighting Russian organized crime, because that's where all my money and power comes from. On Tuesday, Mr. Orr is to appear before a closed hearing of the House Judiciary and House Oversight Committees, that would be today, I guess, jointly investigating the FBI and the Justice Department activities related to the 2016 election. How interesting is that? Not investigating what happened in the election, but investigating the investigation of it. Republicans are likely to ask Mr. Orr why he met with Mr. Steele even after the FBI terminated its relationship with Mr. Steele for speaking to the news media and who approved the meetings. Of course, once again, we'll point out, Republicans will ask why the Department of Justice met with Mr. Steele after the FBI terminated its relationship with Steele. Did the DOJ terminate its relationship with Steele? Or just the FBI? That might be an important question. Those who know Mr. Orr seem perplexed that the president has singled him out. Co-workers and former associates describe him as a scrupulous government official who cares deeply about the Justice Department. He's a small player in a bigger, broader stage here, Mr. Swecker said. I feel bad for him. I think he's well-intentioned. I view him as someone who would never do anything malicious. Mr. Orr's lawyer, Joshua Berman, declined to comment for this article. A graduate of Harvard Law School, Mr. Orr joined the Justice Department in 1991 from a law firm in San Francisco. As a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, he twice won top awards and rose to be chief of the district's Violent Gangs Unit. He had a knack for managing people and pushing cases forward, former associates said, which helped propel him to a job at the Justice Department in Washington in 1999 as the head of the Organized Crime and Racketeering Section. He may know a thing or two. He provided the FBI with resources to prosecute cases and navigated relationships with the intelligence community, brokering disputes and earning the respect of the FBI and prosecutors. As oligarchs and gangs flourished in Eurasia after the fall of the Soviet Union, Mr. Orr, his deputies, the FBI, and federal prosecutors tackled Russian crime syndicates, said J. Kenneth Lowry, a former federal prosecutor who was Mr. Orr's longtime deputy. Until 9/11, organized crime was one of the main priority criminal programs at the Justice Department, said Mr. Lowry, who retired in 2008. Russian organized crime was a focus. Bruce knew a lot of the Russia stuff and traveled there. And by the way, just as an investigative tip, don't lose sight of the organized crime syndicates, even though your focus is supposed to be shifting, according to policy, to terrorism. Terrorism funding very often finds its way where it's going through the facilitation, at least, from organized crime figures along the way who just want to take their cut. Mr. Orr's section supported the 2000 prosecution of Pavlo Lazarenko, the former prime minister of Ukraine, who was convicted of, you'll never guess, money laundering, wire fraud, and extortion in a case brought by the Office of the United States Attorney for San Francisco at the time. Anybody who knows who that was, U.S. Attorney for San Francisco in 2000? Robert S. Mueller III, who is now the special counsel. Mr. Orr was a manager, not a litigator, who built bridges with law enforcement agencies around the world, former Justice Department officials said. He sent top deputies to Hungary to root out the nascent Russian mob in the early 2000s. FBI agents viewed the commitment as a sign of his seriousness about combating Russian organized crime. In 2006, Mr. Orr was part of a group of government officials who revoked the visa of Oleg Deripaska, a Russian billionaire and aluminum magnate. We always chuckle at that one. Officials were concerned that Mr. Deripaska might try to come to the United States to launder illicit profits through real estate, a former law enforcement official said. What a surprising thing for an oligarch/crime boss to do. Mr. Deripaska, a close ally of President Vladimir Putin of Russia, has been tied to the former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, now convicted. Last week, that was, of tax and bank fraud. In 2016, Manafort offered private campaign briefings to Mr. Deripaska, raising concerns about the prospect of Russians wielding influence inside the White House. In April, the United States imposed sanctions on Mr. Deripaska. In 2007, Mr. Orr met Mr. Steele, who was still with MI6, the British spy service, according to a former senior American law enforcement official who knows both men. Both governments approved their contacts, the former official said. Mr. Orr moved on to other senior jobs, starting in 2010 as counsel for international relations in the Justice Department's Transnational Organized Crime and International Affairs section, where he bolstered partnerships with foreign law enforcement agencies. In 2014, he became the director of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Forces, distributing grant money to bolster prosecutorial work. He stayed in touch with Mr. Steele, meeting him in Rome in 2014 and in Washington in 2015. For the FBI, their relationship would come in handy. A longtime informant who provided valuable tips on corruption, Mr. Steele violated his confidentiality agreement with the FBI when he disclosed to a reporter in the months before the 2016 election that he had been working with the Bureau. He had expressed frustration that his information about Mr. Trump, gathered for Fusion GPS, the research firm that hired him on behalf of Democrats later to research the candidate, had gone seemingly nowhere in the FBI. In early November 2016, the agent handling Mr. Steele told him not to obtain intelligence on behalf of the FBI. And yes, by the way, so I guess the Fusion GPS hiring, as you would all note, apparently the original dossier work that he was doing had been commissioned by Republicans at some point, and I suppose when they dropped the issue because Trump clinched their nomination and they had to switch their allegiances to him, yes, at that point, Fusion GPS was approached by Democrats about getting Steele to complete his work. Okay, so in early November 2016, the agent handling Mr. Steele told him not to obtain intelligence on behalf of the FBI. So that's the end of the relationship between the FBI and Steele. That didn't stop FBI agents from collecting coveted information from Mr. Steele, though. While the FBI could no longer consider him a confidential informant, former officials said agents eager to assess the dossier as part of their counterintelligence investigation into links between Trump associates and Russia's election interference, could still document what he was telling a third party, Mr. Orr, because there is no prohibition against contact between Department of Justice officials generally, I guess, and Steele. And when Mr. Orr approached the FBI about his relationship with Mr. Steele, Bureau officials saw an opportunity. Mr. Orr met with Mr. Steele almost a dozen times, beginning in late 2016 through May 2017, according to congressional officials. FBI agents interviewed Mr. Orr after the meetings and documented the information. Republicans have seized on the meetings. Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa and head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, asked the Justice Department to declassify the FBI's reports on them. It seems like he's a key player. Representative Jim Jordan, who liked to allow people to molest and possibly rape the wrestlers in his charge at the University of Ohio, or Ohio State University. Republican, of course, of Ohio, and that doesn't seem to bother anybody there, and a staunch supporter of the president, told Fox News this month. But the arrangement was not unusual, former law enforcement officials said. Senior FBI officials were aware of the Steele meetings, and those involved followed internal guidelines, a former official said. It seems like a nice workaround. If the FBI agents can no longer ask Chris Steele questions, they can certainly listen while other DOJ officials ask questions, or ask them questions later about what did you ask him and what did he tell you. Mr. Orr's contact with Mr. Steele were one small part of a broader effort to determine whether the allegations in the dossier were true, a former official said. The FBI also did not have all the reports that Mr. Steele had produced, and agents were keen to get them. Conservatives have also targeted Ms. Orr, whose contract work at Fusion GPS involved monitoring Russian news media and compiling connections between Mr. Trump and Russia from public documents. She did not work on the dossier, according to a person familiar with her work for Fusion GPS. Mr. Orr still has a job at the Justice Department, though he is functionally no longer a manager. It's unclear how long that will last. Mr. Trump has called for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to fire Mr. Orr. It seems that Bruce had two sins. He met with Chris Steele, and his wife worked for Fusion GPS. None of that seems wrong to me, Mr. Lowry said. Bruce is a straight arrow. He was totally nonpartisan, as we all were expected to be. Very interesting. Now, at least we have a little bit more background information on who this person actually is when complaints about him come up, and we can see how ridiculous the complaints actually are. And, all right, well, I'm grateful for the information, certainly, and probably the best thing that would ever happen to the guy. I mean, I know he's comfortable in his career and everything, and no one wants to leave, and some people just genuinely enjoy being in public service for extended periods of time. But he'll probably end up making 2 to 3 times as much money elsewhere once he's finally fired from the Justice Department by genius Donald Trump. Okay, very interesting. One of several things we have in mind for you, and coming up on the next break. But let's throw out another piece of information. I think this one's relatively short, but you ought to have it in your database here. ABC News reporting the other day, and I might have to kill some video on this. Please don't play this thing. All right, well, let me make sure at least that the volume is off. Okay, special counsel obtains Trump ally Eric Prince's phones and computer. I don't know whether we're going to find anything on him, but it's an interesting development anyway. This was reported. This is old. How come this was circulating again? This is actually from June of 2018. I had no idea. It sounded like new information to me, so we're way behind on this one. But I'm glad to be able to add this to the database. I guess we would have heard if anything really spectacular came of it then, and maybe in that case we won't spend any time digging through all of this to find out what they came up with, because I assume the June reporting isn't going to have it. Interesting. Okay. I wonder how it is that this only now was coming to light and why it was circulating. If anybody has any idea about how then to connect that this old information to it having been circulated again recently, perhaps you could let me know. All right, well, in that case, let's take a look around and see what other comments we might add before our break. Matt Rigdon still enthusiastically joining in the conversation. Thank you very much. It's like having a guest here. It's terrific. Always have something fun to lean on here. Isn't it the most petty thing of all to be petty about someone who is so petty that no one knows who they are? Trump is the pettiest. MAGA. And that's definitely true. He loves being petty, although, he enjoys the attention and the shock value of it. That's not a new theory or anything, though there is new video of Omarosa circulating in which she states the obvious, that Trump thrives on attention, whether it's positive or negative. It's all positive to him. He loves to shock people, and her advice, of course, is that we should starve him of the oxygen that comes from this attention, and that will undermine him, and that'll drive him more crazy than anything. But, well, I think he knows us well enough to know that it's virtually impossible to do. And, of course, she's selling a book that's entirely dependent on attention to Trump. So I don't know how we take her advice or why we would, even if we wanted to. What else? Matthew is commenting on Orr's attorney. Does everyone in Washington have an attorney? Serious question. How can anyone afford to work for Trump when you have to hire an attorney who will bill more per hour than you make? And that is a serious question. People who are actually Trump loyalists are constantly complaining about this, and we keep pointing out that Trump is, King Midas in reverse, and would almost assuredly ruin anyone who agreed to go to work for him. It will cost you enormously when you sign on a dotted line for Donald Trump. Let's see. What else have we got here? Mighty OCD chiming in here. Are we sure that Kagro is real? I'm not. He could be just an AI that Dr. Dworkin and Armando commissioned from a mad scientist. Not sure exactly what that's related to, but I feel like it could be entirely true. I'm never sure. We'll find out after this break. I don't think we will, but we'll say it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on then with bringing you up to date on a couple of small items, and then we'll add a couple of long reads, and then I'll get out of breath and fall ill to the floor. It's a tough thing sometimes, the solo shows, but it gives me an opportunity to share some of these longer form articles with you, or turn short articles into long form ones. Let's see. Definitely have a couple of things that are absolutely, positively, totally new instead of this old piece here. I am curious about why that came to be circulated again about Eric Prince, unless they might have come up with something at some point about what's actually on those phones and computers. I'd be curious to know. Well, I'll explore and see if I can find out. Anyway, this one came up yesterday. We'll see whether there's any writing on it this morning, but I grabbed the tweet, and it was much circulated and much commented upon in the hours afterwards. Todd J. Gilman, Washington bureau chief for the Dallas News, tweeted this one yesterday, tagging Donald Trump in it, saying that Trump intervened in plans to turn the FBI headquarters across the street from his luxury hotel into a construction zone. The FBI building has been a candidate for refurbishment for some time, and Donald Trump, being or pretending to be a builder, has had a lot of opinions about how to do that better or cheaper, or, for instance, how to help Russian subcontractors install microphones in the new FBI building or whatever. But he's also entered into the picture as a private businessman, the owner of the luxury, quote-unquote, luxury hotel across the street. And apparently, in addition to having lots of ideas about how he could skim money off the top of the refurbishment of the FBI building and or aid his Russian friends in bugging the place, he also wanted to intervene as the owner of the hotel across the street. In the refurbishment, there would, of course, be a lot of noise and dust going on, accompanying any construction or refurbishment work, and that would be annoying to the guests. And certainly the owner of the hotel there would be interested, let's see, in either minimizing the amount of work done, the noise that comes with it, or preventing it from being done at all. So once he was pushed out from the prospect of helping his Russian friends plant bugs in the new FBI building, and he wasn't going to have anything to do with that reconstruction. He put on his hotel owner hat and decided to intervene, as he says, in plans to move this construction forward across the street from his hotel. Then, Gilman reports, he invoked executive privilege to block the inspector general from learning what he said in meetings about that construction. How interesting. And here he includes a link to something from, let's open it up here, Bruce Leshan. How does he pronounce his name? He is a WUSA Channel 9 CBS affiliate reporter here in Washington, D.C., WUSA, covering tech, politics, crime, and everything else. So basically that's Donald Trump. Politics and crime. Breaking. New GSA, General Services Administration, new GSA Inspector General's report finds the president was involved in scuttling a plan to rebuild the FBI headquarters across the street from the Trump Hotel. He was at one point in favor of that work when he thought he could skim money out of it, or, like I say, help Russians plant bugs in there. Once he figured out he couldn't do that, he became the owner of the hotel across the street once again. Clarification, let's see, Bruce tweets later, Trump may have been involved in scuttling a plan. Really? Are we going to backtrack? May have been involved in scuttling a plan that would have replaced the current FBI headquarters near the Trump Hotel with a private development and moved the FBI out to the D.C. suburbs. Interesting, that too. Okay. Let's see. That, according to files obtained from Congressman Jerry Connolly's office, apparently. And let's take a look back. We'll go back to Todd Gilman's tweet and read the excerpt that he grabs, I guess, from the documents. It looks like, I guess this is the documents that he gets from Connolly. Early in the review, the OIG, Office of Inspector General, learned that during the course of GSA's decision-making on the revised FBI headquarters plan, and mind you, GSA is the agency that came up with the completely nonsensical explanation for why Donald Trump should be allowed to continue to keep his interest in the hotel in the first place. You'll recall that the lease of the old post office building in which the Trump Hotel resides was explicit in prohibiting any government employees from owning an interest in the hotel. And when Donald Trump became elected, allegedly it was elected president, people wondered, well, that would seem to contradict things here in the contract, wouldn't it? It says that government employees can't own any interest in the hotel located or whatever got located in the old post office. You can't have a government employee have a financial interest in this. And the GSA concluded the whole, it wrapped up the whole mess, of course, very neatly, really, obviously the worst possible way, by concluding that, no, that's not really a problem. It could have gone, and I think people were trying to hint, the president isn't a government employee in the traditional sense. And they might have tried to find some way of finagling that, but GSA kind of, as I recall, they bypassed that entirely and just said, there's no problem here. We just declare there to be no problem, and there's no real reason given for it. Anyway, GSA would also be the outfit making decisions about the reconstruction or refurbishment of the FBI headquarters, just the general contracting agency, the arm of the government that handles that sort of thing. FBI wouldn't do it itself. They outsource it. They don't have the expertise in contracting that the GSA has. You can see those guys are real experts in contracting. Can't be a government employee and run a hotel and lease the old post office space. Actually, you can. Why? Well, because. What a bunch of experts. Okay, so early in the review, the OIG learned that during the course of GSA's decision-making on the revised FBI headquarters plan, Murphy met with the president on January 24th, 2018. I don't know who Murphy is. Is that somebody from the GSA? Met with the president on January 24th, 2018 about the project. When we asked about the meeting, some GSA witnesses, I guess here we're talking about members of Congress, asking Murphy and or other GSA witnesses, some of them refused to answer any questions about this and other relevant White House meetings, and some of those said they were told or believed that the information was subject to executive privilege. We sought to determine whether GSA took the position that executive privilege precluded sharing information with the OIG, which is part of GSA and within the executive branch. So, in other words, does it make any sense for an executive branch employee to ask another executive branch employee to tell them about a meeting that took place with the chief executive? And they said, I can't tell you. And they said, why not? And they said, executive privilege. And you have sort of, particularly for those who are proponents of the unitary executive idea, you got a little bit of a weird situation here. How is it that the executive can invoke executive privilege against itself? I don't know. But presumably the GSA feels like they have constructed an argument for this. Ultimately, GSA's acting general counsel informed us, and I think here again we're talking about Congress, that he received direction from the White House counsel's office regarding the matter. That would be Don McGahn. Don't lose sight of that. He told us that pursuant to those directions, GSA employees were authorized to disclose to the OIG the existence of the White House meetings, discuss who attended, and discuss any high-level agreements that resulted from the meetings. But I guess that's it. What gets said there is somehow apparently out of bounds. Interesting thing, to say the least. They could discuss any high-level agreements that resulted, but not to disclose any statements made by the president. We describe the information we received about the meetings in this report. Very interesting thing, very interesting position, and a weird spot for GSA to be in. We'll see how that gets resolved over the next couple of days, and maybe we can just take a quick peek around and see whether he has any reporting on the subject today. Todd Gilman, Dallas Morning News. Let's Google it. Todd Gilman, Dallas Morning News, Trump, and let's say hotel and FBI, and see if anything comes up. Just so far, the tweet. And anything recent? No. I guess maybe he's still writing on that. We could check his Twitter feed, though, and see if he's sent anything out recently with a link on it. Let's see. We got the Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke news here. The lowering the flags. Let's see. Let's see what we got here. Oh, okay. No, that too. And well, okay. Now, so he's very busy with the flag issue. Yeah, since tweeting that note about the FBI building, it has been all tweets about the flag. And let's see, nothing for the past 16 hours or so. So I imagine Trump murdered him. Let's just say, murder. I hope that's not the case. Look out, Todd. You may be on the list. Okay, back to Pocket. And perhaps now time to move on to a couple of the other issues looming out here. Here's an interesting one, and I think this one we can keep relatively short, but Media Matters noticed this one. As you recall, yesterday I noted for you that we were working under the cloud of yet another mass shooting, a splashy one that made the papers. Of course, the Jacksonville shooting at the Madden 2019 video game tournament. I mean, I think you've probably all heard the news, but just in case you didn't hear the particulars of it, essentially a guy participating in a video game tournament lost and decided to go get his gun and shoot everybody. I don't know whether he shot the people he lost to or what, but that was apparently the entirety of his motivation, at least a day or so after the event. I don't know whether we'll find out that he has terrorist literature in his house sometime later or whatever and fill in some of the blanks, but that's where we are. couple of remarkable things about that, not the least of which really is actually that there are professional video game tournaments out there. I have learned this recently, not from this incident, but from my kids who are fairly certain that it's important that I know that you can become a professional video game player. I'm not very happy about that, but it is true. The NRA took a remarkable position on this one. Of course, they had to find a way to get on their various platforms and say that it was frivolous, stupid, and wrong-headed to blame guns for this latest mass shooting, and the blame must lie elsewhere. And I guess they took to NRA TV, because no one else would have them to do this, although that's a lie. Plenty of people would host them to get on their air and make lies like this. But NRA TV host Grant Stinchfield, whoever that is, decided to get on the quote-unquote air and criticize the survivor, at least one of the survivors of this video game tournament shooting, for supposedly not hearing the gunshots over his headphones. And there's been a lot of, there was some video and audio released from inside the building, none of which showed the shooter, and that's just fine with me, but a lot of audio that made it clear what kind of chaos was going on. But there were at least some people who didn't hear at least the initial gunshots, and I'm not certain whether they heard them or whether they ignored them or they didn't sound like real gunshots, and who knows what you think you could be hearing. It was the game they were playing, a video game, was Madden football, so it wasn't a first-person shooter game, of which there are plenty of tournaments around the country, and I wonder how long would it take for people with headsets on that are actually hearing video game gunshots to hear actual gunshots. But check out the theory being proposed here now by the NRA. Grant Stinchfield, the host for the National Rifle Association's NRA TV outlet, reacted to the mass shooting at a video game tournament in Jacksonville, Florida, by criticizing a survivor who shared video of the incident for supposedly not hearing the shooting over his headphones. The August 26th shooting, which took place at a Madden 19 tournament, left 2 people dead and 9 others wounded. The NRA and NRA TV frequently focus on what victims of high-profile mass casualties could have supposedly done to avoid being shot, rather than focusing on how the perpetrator was able to access weapons to carry out the attack. So during their August 27th broadcast of NRA TV's current event show Stinchfield, and they should come up with another name for that one, Stinchfield played a video, and we are warned that the video is disturbing. We won't be playing it here. But he said that it showed the survivor not reacting to the shooting because he was wearing headphones. Stinchfield said, "There's no running for cover. There's not even any looking around. They're still focused on the screen in front of them as someone is firing a handgun through the crowd." Stinchfield apparently is mistaken about what the video showed. No one is seen wearing headphones, and the only headphones seen in the shot are draped over a computer monitor, not on someone's head. The person filming seems aware of the shooting as it happens, since the camera moves around without focusing on the screen. He also later tweeted about being in shock that I was actually witnessing this while it was live. So basically, Stinchfield's statement here is, if you look at the video and we play it with the audio up, because I want to show you something that's very, very important of that gaming video there. If we could pull it up, and I want you to listen to the shots as it happens. What I really want is the other video. You can hear the shots in the background here. I count 15 of them. But the other video where the cell phone is over the shoulder of the person as they're playing, just scroll it through for 1 second because this is so important. Here it is. And so he's doing his own on-air production, just as we do here on this show. If you listen over the talking, that person doesn't hear the shots. Why? Because their headphones are on. Except they're not. But okay, even if they were, this is another example of people not being aware of their surroundings. I heard at least 4 or 5 or 6 shots while that person was taking a cell phone video of the game. There's no running for cover. There's not even any looking around. They're still focused on the screen in front of them as someone is firing a handgun through the crowd. You've got to be aware of your surroundings at all places because everybody is carrying a handheld instant death machine, you see. I know it's hard when you're wearing headphones, which he wasn't, but we talk about this all the time, whether you're jogging and wearing headphones, whether you're at a video game wearing headphones. If they're so loud you can't hear what's going on around you, you are living in your own world. That can become deadly. That's what becomes deadly. Wearing headphones, not living in a world full of handheld instant death machines. And as one of our Twitter friends did point out yesterday, aren't these the people who are constantly advocating for silencers to be made legal? I mean, what would that really, how would that help things, right? Even if you don't have headphones. Now, we should note for the record that along the way we have learned that silencers don't actually render the weapon silent, though it does significantly reduce the noise. And in a loud environment that's otherwise loud, besides the shooting, you likely wouldn't be able to hear the gunshots across a crowded and noisy room. So who knows? I don't know if I could tell you what you'd be able to hear. Anyway, it was Grudging One, our friend Grudge, or Grudging Tweeter, as he used to call himself, who asked that question. And it's a good one, but that's where we are now, literally, with the NRA. It's their position that you need to learn to you need to change the way you live to avoid the guns and the bullets in the hands of the wrong people. But also, who else had a really interesting tweet about it was Hunter, saying something similar, not about the silencers, but saying, look, now they're saying you're not allowed to wear headphones, you're not allowed to watch a movie, you can't be in a movie theater because somebody could come in while you're distracted watching the movie that you paid to watch and they could shoot and you're not aware of your surroundings. You must be constantly on the lookout for guns, but, this is important, never be alarmed when you actually see them, because it's supposed to be normal to have open carry, right? These people who call the cops on people just because they're carrying AR-15s down the street. It's unbelievable. You people don't know anything about the Second Amendment? We do this so that it normalizes being armed in public, as it should be. So, yes, you got to be constantly on the lookout for guns, but never be alarmed when you actually see them. But you also have to be ready to dodge bullets at a moment's notice. That's the NRA's America, where we are now. And by the way, that prompts another thought, too. This is interesting. I don't think I've seen this comparison made yet, although certainly at the height of the open carry walk craze, and we certainly made the comparison between the way open carry people feel that they are persecuted by the police versus the way Black Lives Matter protesters are treated by the police. That comparison we've made explicitly, and lots of people did. But it now occurs to me that there's another subgenre of Black Lives Matter issues that should be compared directly to the open carry craze. Most of the videos you'll find on YouTube about open carry are cell phone videos of open carry demonstrators filming their confrontations with police that almost always include mention by the police that they had been called to the scene by local citizens who had seen the people walking down the street with rifles slung across their back or sometimes right in front of them and become concerned. And they called the police to come check out what was going on. We should, of course, be comparing that to the latest craze of calling the police when people see black people doing things that either aren't suspicious in the least or which sometimes could perhaps be considered suspicious but could also very easily be entirely innocent, or making things up out of whole cloth and calling the cops on people because they are in an area, being black, where it is disturbing to at least one white person. We've seen the police called on black people at public pools. We've seen them called on people selling lemonade. We've seen them called on people who were trying to open their own car doors. We've seen them called on, let's go even further back to the old beer summit. We've seen them called on people trying to get into their own apartments, right? This has been going on forever, but it's been in the public consciousness for many years, and then it sort of faded away. And now, it was like the hottest topic of the summer. And we're finally getting to the point where people are proposing legislation saying there ought to be some criminalization of making what are essentially false police reports that very often, if not always, endanger the lives of black people who have the cops called on them. And it seems to be like the latest alt-right craze too, the idea of calling the cops and making up a complaint about a black person so that they will either have their lives threatened or find themselves publicly humiliated as police come and throw them to the ground and stand on their backs and necks because somebody falsely called in a report of an armed, crazy black guy. But yeah, you ought to really give that some thought too. Just watching, especially watching those open carry videos where the demonstrators, the open carriers themselves are always so furious and up in arms, especially in their comments, both spoken comments on the video and in the comments they make in the YouTube comments section afterwards about, it's tyranny and these cops, they abuse me and this and that, and all the time. The cops are always showing up and, how you doing today, sir? What's going on today, sir? Oh, well, I'm exercising my Second Amendment rights. Okay, I see that, but I just wanted to say, we had some complaints in the area, just wondered what was going on, and maybe we should come check it out. Well, I don't have to answer you. I don't have to show an ID. I don't have to answer any questions. Get out of my way. It's unbelievable what these guys get away with. And it was always unbelievable in context, in contrast with what was happening in the way police were treating black people at protests. But yeah, now you have the much more direct comparison of, hey, there's a guy walking back and forth on my block. He must be casing the joint, because I heard that as a expression in a movie once, and it was about crime. So you better get down here because there could be some crime happening because there's somebody walking back and forth. Really? And of course, then it turns out, they're walking back and forth with their dog, or they're walking back and forth with a stroller, and they live here, and this is their block. And the reason they're walking back and forth is they're just walking up and down the sidewalk and trying to calm down a baby or taking the dog out for a walk or whatever it is. But they did it when they were black. So it's really huge, but don't call and how dare you call the police when somebody's walking around with an AR-15 slung over their back. Anyway, that was an interesting development too. We're now once again bumping up on the next break, but let's choose a piece or two that we can add to the mix here that might be of more generalized interest, and there are so many of them here. Let's see. Why don't we go with, let's see, this one's over here. There's an article over the weekend from the New York Times, once again, an opinion piece that I thought had an intriguing headline that perhaps we can begin to share and then take a short break and come back to. But, one that you might be interested in hearing to, from Peter Werner, Wehner. Mr. Werner served in the three previous Republican administrations and is now a contributing opinion writer, of course, because he served in 3 Republican administrations. The New York Times needs this guy as an opinion writer. But luckily, it appears that he has his head screwed on at least somewhat straight here. The full spectrum corruption of Donald Trump. Everyone and everything he touches rots. And I certainly agree with that. And Donald Trump himself rots. I say so. Let's take a look at what an interesting expression, the full spectrum corruption. There's never been, he says, any confusion about the character defects of Donald Trump. The question has always been just how far he would go and whether other individuals and institutions would stand up to him or become complicit in his corruption. And the answer is everybody does a little bit of both, it seems. When I first took to these pages 3 summers ago to write about Mr. Trump, I warned my fellow Republicans to just say no, both to him and his candidacy. One of my concerns was that if Mr. Trump were to succeed, he would redefine the Republican Party in his image. Whoops. That's already happened in areas like free trade, free markets, and the size of government. In attitudes towards ethnic nationalism and white identity politics, in attitudes, in America's commitment to its traditional allies, even. That's true, too. Let's see. In how Republicans view Russia, and in their willingness to call out leaders of evil governments like North Korea, rather than lavish praise on them. But in no area has Mr. Trump more fundamentally changed the Republican Party than in its attitude toward ethics and political leadership. That's likely true. Very interesting. We'll come back to the rest of that article after a brief break. Catch your breath. Get a drink. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. A little trouble with the mute button there. And my stunned reading over the break of various additional takes on the latest mass shooting issue. I don't want to return to that necessarily for the balance of the show, but a good comment from Rebecca Romans bringing up the a story I did see fly by earlier today about Rick Scott. The tweet here from Aunt Krabby, who says, Florida's NRA governor blames churches and grandparents for mass shooting. That's interesting. I guess I'd be curious to see how he comes to that conclusion. Rebecca, of course, saying, hey, I thought churches and grandparents were good influences on children, but I guess Rick Scott feels differently. This from WashingtonSources.org, a blog of, one stripe or another, picking up Florida's NRA governor blames churches, grandparents for mass shooting. NRA poster boy Rick Scott blamed everything he could think of except guns for the latest mass shooting in the state. Interesting. How does he get around to this one? Let's see. Included on his list were grandparents, schools, churches, synagogues, and a paucity of male role models. Not included, of course, guns. Let's see. The horrifying Jacksonville shooting at a esports tournament in Jacksonville. That's where Jacksonville shootings are going to be. It's true. Left 3 people dead, including the gunman. That's the difference in the numbers there. Who opened fire on the tournament after reportedly getting into an argument with another gamer. Sunday's shooting also came just 2 days after a triple shooting at a nearby Jacksonville high school football game. That's true, too. That's another issue going on here. And by the way, of the mass shootings that have disturbed us all of late, a disproportionate number of them have happened in Florida. I mean, that's probably worth noting at some point. Addressing reporters after the shooting, Scott said society needed to figure out why young men like the 24-year-old shooter were killing people. They're not valuing life. Something is causing that, Scott said. There's something wrong. Whether it's the parents or the grandparents, whether it's our schools, whether it's our churches and our synagogues, whether it's elected officials, there's something that's changed in our society that young men don't have value like they used to. Of course, forget the idea of actively working to make it easier to get guns almost all the time and carry them almost everywhere. But hey, why would we bother talking about something like that? That would make no sense, and it would upset our patrons. Yeah, it's well, what can you say? It's pretty crazy out there. All right, let's see. Do we at this point turn to let's see. I opened up 1 or 2 other things here. This is sort of an interesting sideline on this one. Let's see. This is interesting from Ben Collins, who is a reporter at NBC News, and says, Mike Cernovich, Gateway pundit, and Ian Miles Cheong, whose name I believe we've heard once or twice, but I guess he belongs lumped in with these guys, Cernovich and Gateway Pundit. Today, all claimed that the Jacksonville shooter was, quote, a, quote, member of the anti-Trump resistance, unquote, citing a Reddit account called Raven Champs. Well, Raven Champs just posted to Reddit about 15 minutes ago that he's not the shooter. I guess is that what's supposed to be? The citing a Reddit account called Raven Champs, like they thought that's who the shooter was, or that's sort of poorly constructed there. It made me think that a guy on Reddit by the name of Raven Champs says that the shooter was a member of the anti-Trump resistance. Well, let's see. Raven Champs, we have, let's see, a post on Reddit commenting, racist, toxic white male gun nuts killed again. Turns out the shooter, I guess, was actually a cowardly, neurotic Jew and hated Trump. I'm not even certain how to take that, actually. And, well, I mean, I guess they were trying to say that Raven Champs was the shooter, but then, of course, he's posting, hey, I'm alive, so I guess that would mean that I didn't do this because the shooter in Jacksonville shot himself. But the Gateway Pundit story saying that it was him or that the shooter was a member of the anti-Trump resistance is still alive. And let's see, here's the Mike Cernovich tweet here. Today's mass shooter was a member of the resistance who referred to Trump supporters as Trump-tards. A review of his Reddit history reveals. But of course, what they did was, I guess, pick on somebody who had, or fixate on somebody who had a online handle similar to one that the shooter had used in the past and said that's the guy, and then spread the information from there. It's also still up on InfoWars and True Pundit, Ben notes. This is now 4 times in 20 months that Gateway Pundit has misidentified the perpetrator of a terror attack. Below is a thread of the rest. Let's see. We've got Gateway Pundit framed 3 wrong people for terror attacks last year, including trying to pin the Charlottesville car attack on an anti-Trump protester who was actually at a wedding 1,000 miles away at the time. That's an interesting bit of news. And then another similar tweet. Let's see. LOL, this is incredible, says Ben. Gateway Pundit just added 2 question marks to the middle of the headline. What a website. So now it reads, Jacksonville shooter was a member of the anti-Trump resistance, question mark, murdered 3 people, update. Of course, he murdered 2 and then shot himself. Anyway, just sort of keeping an eye on that out there, and that still exists as a tactic among the alt-right, and they have never been properly held to account for it, and I don't really know whether they ever will be. Now, back, if you will, to The Full Spectrum Corruption of Donald Trump by Peter Werner. We'll give him the Germanic pronunciation of that. Who had served in 3 previous Republican administrations, but apparently counts himself among the Never Trump crowd. He says he warned 3 summers ago about Trump and his toxicity and why Republicans should avoid him at all costs, warning that he would redefine the Republican Party in his image, and it has worked. Now, for decades, Republicans, and especially conservative Republicans, he writes, insisted that character counted in public life. That was their excuse. I mean, they needed to say that, of course. And it sounded like it might even have been a good idea in a way, but of course it was chiefly the mechanism by which they hoped to impeach and be rid of Bill Clinton. And then it turns out they really didn't mean it at all. But I guess Peter thinks that they did or should have. So, for decades, Republicans, and especially conservative ones, insisted that character counted in public life. They were particularly vocal about this during Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal, arguing against compartmentalization, by which they meant overlooking moral turpitude, nice word, in the Oval Office because you agree with the president's policy agenda or because the economy is strong. Senator Lindsey Graham, then in the House, went so far as to argue that, quote, impeachment is not about punishment. Impeachment is about cleansing the office. Impeachment is about restoring honor and integrity to the office. I would be interested if we get all the way through this piece and find no mention of Brett Kavanaugh in it. but interested but not surprised or shocked, let's say. But of course, we have been forewarned, and we've read the interesting takes on these things and the polling that tells us that the people who insisted that that was a core value never really meant it and now no longer recognize it as a core value. But okay. There's never been any confusion. Oh, I'm sorry. I've started over up the top again here. We should have continued after Lindsey Graham's quote by reading. All that has changed with Mr. Trump as president. For Republicans, honor and integrity are now passé. We saw it again last week when the president's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen, standing in court before a judge and under oath, implicated Mr. Trump in criminal activity while his former campaign chairman was convicted in another courtroom on financial fraud charges. Most Republicans in Congress were either silent or came to Mr. Trump's defense, which is how this tiresome drama now plays itself out. It is a stunning turnabout, but it's entirely complete. Don't forget about Kavanaugh. A party that once spoke with urgency and apparent conviction about the importance of ethical leadership, fidelity, honesty, honor, decency, good manners, setting a good example, has hitched its wagon to the most thoroughly and comprehensively corrupt individual who has ever been elected president. And I don't think he even was. Some of the men who have been elected president have been unscrupulous in certain areas. Infidelity, lying, dirty tricks, financial misdeeds. But we've never before had the full spectrum corruption that we see in the life of Donald Trump. For many Republicans, this reality still hasn't broken through. But facts that don't penetrate the walls of an ideological silo are facts nonetheless. And the moral indictment against Mr. Trump is obvious and overwhelming. Corruption has been evident in Mr. Trump's private and public life, in how he has treated his wives, in his business dealings and scams, in his pathological lying and cruelty, in his bullying and shamelessness, in his conspiracy mongering and appeals to the darkest impulses of Americans. Senator Bob Corker, a Republican, refers to the president's race-based comments as a base stimulator. Mr. Trump's corruptions are ingrained, the results of a lifetime of habits. It was delusional to think he would change for the better once he became president. Pivot. Some of us who have been lifelong Republicans and previously served in Republican administrations held out a faint hope that our party would at some point say, enough. Well, that was dumb of you. That there would be some line Mr. Trump would cross, some boundary he would transgress, some norm he would shatter, some civic guardrail he would uproot, some action he would take, some scheme or scandal he would be involved in that would cause large numbers of Republicans to break with the president. No such luck. Mr. Trump's corruptions have therefore become theirs. So far, there's been no bottom, and there may never be. It's quite possible. This should have been obvious to me much sooner than it was, yes, that I was blinded to certain realities I should have recognized. In any case, the Republican Party's as yet unbreakable attachment to Mr. Trump is coming at quite a cost. There is the rank hypocrisy, the squandered ability to venerate public character or criticize Democrats who lack it, and the damage to the white evangelical movement, which has, for the most part, enthusiastically rallied to Mr. Trump and as a result has been largely discredited. There's also likely to be an electoral price to pay in November. One hopes, anyway. But the greatest damage is being done to our civic culture and our politics. I'm enjoying it. It's interesting. It's a little sappy, and of course, it's a little bit strange to hear Republicans insist that this was either always their position or it's some new development after lying our way into a war and authorizing the torture of people snatched off the street at random in Baghdad so that they would confess to being Al-Qaeda connected so that we could retroactively justify the war in Iraq as an arm of the global war on terror. None of this actually happened. None of it actually occurred. The torture was real, but the connections were not. And, of course, those of you who've heard me speak on that topic before will not need any reminding that ultimately what we found out was that Dick Cheney was pushing to authorize this and authorize the torture of random individuals in Baghdad so that they would give statements that Republicans in America could wave around like bloody shirts in order to justify their war policy. They wanted to win more elections in America, so they tortured random civilians in Baghdad, hoping to elicit confessions that would enable them to say, I was right all along. The big genius here of Donald Trump is that he cut out the middleman. We no longer need to torture people to get these statements. We can simply claim what we want to be true and wave that around. And the torture will just be sugar on top, a bonus. Torturing brown people. That's a good thing in and of itself. No need to sully it all up with American politics, I say. Thanks, Donald Trump, for freeing us from that one. Right, so the greatest damage is being done to our civic culture and our politics because they were pure up until last year. Mr. Trump and the Republican Party are right now the chief emblem of corruption and cynicism in American political life, of an ethic of might makes right. Torture. Dehumanizing others, torture, is fashionable and truth is relative. It's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation. Truth isn't truth, in the infamous words of Mr. Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. They are stripping politics of its high purpose and nobility. And I interrupt one more time to say, I think we're right now exploring the limits of my acceptance of Greg's thesis, which is not wrong, it's just, like everything, nuanced, that we need to accept alliances where we find them from among Republicans who are coming to the realization that Trump is a disaster. And I'm sure Greg would also have pointed out, in opposition to what's been posited here in this piece, about Republicans not coming to this realization or it not mattering or no such luck and there's not going to be an event that turns it. And Greg would say, look, he was working from a very narrow base to begin with. He only barely won, if he won at all. If what he produced at the ballot box in 2016 can be termed a win, and the Electoral College apparently insists that we do that. But okay, if you accept it as a win, he's in no position to lose small segments of the Republican Party a piece at a time. He cannot lose anything and still hold on to power if, of course, the vote totals were to come in approximately the same way in 2020 as they did in 2016. But incumbency changes everything, so I don't know whether it will really produce the result you would think it would have produced in 2016 if we had been able to shave groups off a piece at a time. But we'll take what we can get. But the idea, though, also that we need to either make common cause with, reach out to, or welcome somehow with open arms Republicans who are coming to this realization, or who are speaking out, having come to this realization apparently several years ago and remaining a stalwart never-Trumper all the way through, understood insofar as the mission is being rid of Donald Trump. And that's an important mission, and it might be one you might consider putting aside other missions in order to facilitate. But you should also be aware, and we'll just use the platform of the show to raise it, that there's also an awful lot of guilty history erasing going on here by Republicans. I don't know if they're aware of it, or whether they are aware of it and doing it on purpose. But like I said, lying at the heart of one of, I would argue probably all of, the three previous Republican administrations which our author served was, at least in the case of George W. Bush, and I would argue all of them, quite honestly, this idea, I don't know, variously expressed as the unitary executive, the imperial presidency, various ways of getting at the same idea, that Republicans as a governing principle think that the power of Republican presidents is beyond question and unlimited, and I don't know what you would say, unlimitable, if that's actually a word. Unlimitable? Not subject to any limits under the Constitution or any other governing organization you could possibly come up with. That it was important to have an autocrat, essentially, at the head of things. And it came to a head in the George W. Bush administration. Like I said, you have an administration that was torturing real human beings for no particular reason other than they thought it's happening in a remote area of the world and Americans won't care. The people being tortured are brown and Americans won't care. The people being tortured are Muslims and Americans would cheer. The people being tortured are Iraqis, and we're at war in Iraq, and so therefore Iraqis are horrible people. And eventually also that it would produce materials that could be used to bolster Republican electoral prospects here in the United States, and that was all that mattered to them. And so let's go ahead, therefore, and do it. And the idea that we were somehow living in a golden age of ethics and right and truth, and that it's only Donald Trump who has corrupted the Republican Party and made corruption and cynicism a big part of American political life and served an ethic of might making right, and that dehumanizing others should be considered fashionable and truth should be considered relative. This was all happening in the Republican administrations he served, and David French served, and whoever else, David Frum served, and Bill Kristol served, not directly, but certainly in his daily life. Anyway, all of these noble never-Trumpers, it's good to hear Republicans repudiating Donald Trump, but at the very least, we can use this platform to remind everybody, yes, keep it in the back of your mind. Once, I don't know, maybe once the revolution's complete, if there ever is one, or whatever, if we're ever finally rid of Donald Trump, great. And you can recognize their contributions to it, but, I don't know what to tell you. I guess I'd have to say you've got a lot to answer for. And, to some extent, they're acting on principle, but I do wonder sometimes whether they don't also consider that they might be buying themselves or hoping to be buying themselves a pass from being held to account for their own wrongdoing in previous Republican administrations. This didn't happen by accident. It's not one guy. It's a continuum, and you were a part of it. And I'm sure that somebody somewhere along the line more liberal than you or I can come and point out our own complicity and things that we could have, should have done things about and didn't. And it's a never-ending cycle, but it's a lot easier, I think, to, pin on Republican functionaries who, about whom we had genuine and legitimate and true complaints then about their devaluing of human life, about their contributions in the areas of corruption and cynicism and the ethic that might makes right. I don't want to leave that aside. Okay. That's not all politics is, he continues in his piece. Self-interest is always a factor, but if politics is only about power unbounded by morality, if it's simply about rulers governing by the law of the jungle, about a prince acting like a beast, in the words of Machiavelli, then the whole enterprise will collapse. What if it was about torturing innocent people because you knew you could get away with it and benefit politically? Well, one would argue that the whole enterprise would collapse. We have to distinguish between imperfect leaders and corrupt ones, and we need the vocabulary to do so. And here's where it becomes troublesome, because I advocate for that vocabulary too. You and your Republican presidents prior to Donald Trump did this very thing. And your entire article is about needing a vocabulary to do so from this point forward. Donald Trump forward, the Republican Party is a problem. Donald Trump before Donald Trump, and looking back, well, we were just regular, honest to God people. We had policy differences. Torture policy, for instance, was a difference that we had. You see what I'm getting at. Okay, well, anyway. A warning, he says, to my Republican friends. The worst is yet to come. Thanks to the work of Robert Mueller, a distinguished public servant, not the leader of a group of angry Democrat thugs, as the president would have it. We are going to discover deeper and deeper layers to Mr. Trump's corruption. And when we do, I expect Mr. Trump will unravel further as he feels more cornered, more desperate, more enraged. His behavior will become ever more erratic, disordered, and crazed. Most Republicans have thrown their MAGA hats over the Trump wall and will stay with him to the end. Or I guess most Republicans having thrown their MAGA hats over the Trump wall will stay with him to the end. Was a tax cut, deregulation, and court appointments really worth all this? It's a good question. Was winning a re-election in 2004 really worth denying all of the torture that was going on? Was it really worth excusing all the warrantless wiretapping? I don't know. I guess apparently it was. So, I have my questions. I have my doubts about these things. I have my doubts about the worst being yet to come. I think there's a lot of the worst was in the past, but we've forgotten about it because George Bush, I don't know what, spends his time painting, and that's a lot less painful to contemplate than the anger tweets of Donald Trump. It's not really much of an excuse. And one of the more exciting prospects that actually came to mind as I was reading that concluding paragraph there was the idea that a cornered Donald Trump, estranged even from a significant portion of what is ostensibly his own party, I wonder if it might be interesting to see him lashing out in whataboutism and releasing classified documents relating to prior administrations, whether Republican or Democrat, and he might be angry at the Republicans who are against him too, and releasing information that would, in fact, that he thought would hopefully, get him out of this situation by whatabouting it to death, but might in fact facilitate holding to account prior Republican and I suppose in some cases Democratic administrations for their own contributions to this deterioration. I don't know whether that's something to hope for or not, but it's an interesting prospect, something to think about. And, well, now being time to wrap up the situation in the show, we'll have to leave things for the rest of the week and explore this further on. Armando, I see, has sent me an interesting article here, too. Sam Nunberg, speaking out on Twitter. I guess it's not an article, but a tweet. If CL ever opens his corrupt scumbag white trash mouth about me again, I will file a complaint with the proper government body, on his illegal and swampy foreign Islamist lobbying. Where's your White House job, CL, you white trash scumbag? Well, I guess he's a little bit angry with CL being Corey Lewandowski. So that could be very exciting. Thanks, Armando, for sending that one our way. We'll have to hold on to that and see if that develops for tomorrow's show or later in the week. Very interesting. And, I like that he will file a complaint with the proper government body, too. I don't know where these conservative Republicans, quote unquote, came by their faith in appropriate government bodies, but perhaps he thinks that Donald Trump would still be, for some reason, loyal to him and direct the, quote unquote, appropriate government body to do his bidding in some way. I can't imagine why he thinks that would be the case, but okay. They love big government all of a sudden when they think it'll weigh in on their behalf. Okay, time to wrap things up here. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we'll have Greg Dworkin back with us. Joan McCarter still taking advantage of the pre-Labor Day situation, and we'll be off once again on Wednesday. We miss her terribly, but we'll see her back here after Labor Day when people start paying attention, traditionally, I'm told, to everything else that's going on around them. And now, though, time for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, and we'll start things a little bit earlier so that we can get you a readout on the various things that he'll be covering that we may have missed, or better angles on the things we may actually have obsessed over on today's show. What do we got here? Starting off in his Bistro Cafe. Call Trump's trade deal anything you want, just don't call it NAFTA. Ooh, and I have to dig up somebody's idea for an alternative name for it. Not the one I came up with yesterday, because that one's not radio safe anyway. On the rest of the menu, Italy's Donald Trump is investigated for violating immigrants' rights. West Virginia Governor Jim Justice is accused of stacking the state Supreme Court with Republicans. Oh, important story there. Sorry we missed it. Stay tuned then for Justice's take on that one, and we'll try and get to that later on in the week too. And the GOP fears Congress will actually do its oversight job after the midterm blue wave. Got to stop that from happening. After his break, moving on to the chef's table, where a Florida Trump Tower owner avoided personal conversations with Donnie, 2 scoops, out of fear he'd ask for money. Wow. Unusual. Okay, and I guess not. Tiger Woods really doesn't want to discuss his relationship with Trump, and I think that would be a mess for all those involved. All that, though, and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Bon appetit. Enjoy the show. Stay tuned, as you should, all day long here on Netroots Radio. We'll come back to waste another 15 seconds or so after this important announcement.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, I found it. The tweet I was looking for from the Red Pen, you'll have to look for him as the Red Pen 3, as Red Pen 1 and 2, I guess, were already taken. But the Red Pen suggested, how about for that new trade agreement, the North American renegotiated awesome new joint agreement, or Naranja. Figure it out if you don't get it right away. We'll see you tomorrow.